your attention back to the history of that time. Some of you were here and some of you were not. If you remember, a few months before, this city was subject to siege by the police when Mayor Daley gave a shoot to kill and a shoot to maim order with regard to African American people who had an uprising after the Martin Luther King assassination. That was in April of that year. In May of that year, there was another peaceful, nonviolent march against the war in Vietnam. Once again, there was a police riot, and the police beat heads of protesters. But I want to talk now a little bit about a report that set the record straight in 1968 for people who weren't there and didn't see that violence. And you can find it online, Rights in Conflict. It is a report to the Commission on the Causes and the Prevention of Violence, the U.S. government. And the summary of that report says as follows. The nature of the police response was unrestrained and indiscriminate police violence on many occasions, particularly at night. The violence was made all the more shocking by the fact that it was often inflicted upon persons who broke no law, disobeyed no order, made no threat.
That's 3 strikes.
These included peaceful demonstrators, onlookers, and a large number of residents who were simply passing through or happened to live in the areas where confrontations were occurring. Does that sound familiar? Are there other times then and now where the same thing has happened? You can answer that question as well as I. Newsmen and photographers were singled out for assault. 60 of them were assaulted, and their equipment deliberately damaged. Fundamental police training was ignored, and officers, when on the scene, were often unable to control their men. As one police officer put it, what happened didn't have anything to do with police work. Go read this report. The 11-page summary is enough to tell you what the real history is and who these officers who are having a reunion 41 years later really are. But do we need to remember? Yes, we do. That history doesn't stop there. That a year or a year and a half later, these same Chicago police, in conspiracy with the FBI, in conspiracy with the state's attorney, Edward Hanrahan, conspired to murder Fred Hampton and Mark Clark in their beds. Now, they tried to lie about that history, too. They said it was a shootout, and it took many, many years to show that, in fact, it was not. But that was shown, and it was further shown that the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover and COINTELPRO was behind that raid and those murders. Well, now it's 40 years in December, and we again have to defend our history. We again have to keep the record straight with regard to Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. So it's all of you and all of you who you deal with who have to make the people's history known and make sure that lazy and corrupt media people don't allow the lie to come back into our history and into the truth of what has happened in these unbelievably brutal police incidents, end quote. But then right after Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, within years, we had the Vietnam War imported to Chicago. And it was imported by John Burge and men who worked for him, who came back from Vietnam with torture devices that were used on Vietnamese people there. And for 20 years, John Burge and his men tortured suspects at Area 2 in the south side of Chicago. And who was it that spoke and stepped up in the defense of John Burge? Of course it was the city of Chicago. Of course it was Mayor Daley, wasn't it?
That's right.
Mayor Daley covered up the fact
That's right.
that this torture was taking place when he was state's attorney. But it was also the Fraternal Order of Police. For you, those of you who are too young to remember, John Burge was fired in 1993. And what did the FOP do? They attempted to put a float in Mayor Daley's St. Patrick's Day parade, honoring Burge and the others who tortured and who had been fired.
Wasn't Burge a veteran of '68? He's gonna come out. Pat Hilson.
No.
Oh, so Pat Hilson.
FOP. What is FOP doing now? And we thank them for giving us this opportunity to come and speak the truth to the FOP and to speak the truth about history in this city about police violence. What are they doing now? $1 million plus they are forking over to defend Burge now that he's been 25 years later indicted.
Stop defending him, assholes.
That's what the FOP's doing now. So we must call on the FOP, and particularly those members of the FOP who do not want to be stigmatized by those cops in 1968, who don't want to be stigmatized by those raiders in 1969 who murdered Fred Hampton, who don't want to be stigmatized by those officers under Burge who tortured over 100 men. We call on the FOP, we call on the city of Chicago, and we call on all fair-minded citizens to say to the FOP, you can have your reunion. The First Amendment, I suppose, allows you to have your reunion. But don't lie about the history. Don't lie about what happened in 1968. Don't lie about what happened in 1969. And don't lie about what happened in those police stations under John Burge. And finally, don't lie about what's happening to our citizens, particularly our poor and minority citizens, on the streets of Chicago every day.